Hello and welcome to my internship video. For my internship, I chose to go to Avro Academy. Avro Academy is a private school in Toronto that provides individualized full and part-time programs for students to earn Ontario credits. Students not attending the full-time programs have a great degree of choice in regards to what they learn, how long they learn, and what they want to learn on a given day. Educators work with the students in order to build individualized courses that fit each student's unique schedule, learning style, and interests. Avro also places a high emphasis on smaller class sizes, often having ratios as small as 3:1. I chose to come to Avro because I was genuinely curious about the inner workings of a private school system. We will be graduating from our program soon and moving on to exploring our careers. And although I'm very focused on getting hired into a public board, I wanted to know more about the private school system. Ultimately, I want to work in whatever system best aligns with my goals and values, and I felt that by exposing myself to the environment, I'd be able to make a better informed decision of where I'd enjoy teaching the most. More importantly, though, I wanted to know what really differentiated public and private schools in regards to the student's education. There's a long-standing debate arguing what the quality of education between public and private sectors. And over the years, we've seen a decline in public enrollment and an increase in private enrollment. This internship would give me an opportunity to observe the private system in action and communicate with both students and teachers within the system. There are many affordances given to private schools, and my hope was to discover whether or not some of these affordances, which could hypothetically be adopted into a public setting, make a difference in the understanding and engagements of students with their education. So in my initial research, I found some papers that estimated the impact private secondary schools had on students' decisions to pursue college. Generally speaking, they found a positive net effect, and it suggested that private schools get to students to college sooner, and this influenced the attainment of degrees. So this just meant that students who went to private schools genuinely got a degree. But I wanted to know why. So within the first few days at Avro Academy, it became very apparent that there were many affordances in private school settings that contributed to student success. So there were things like school budget, which obviously determined what kind of things students could have, the kind of classes students could have, and the type of environment students learned in. The available resources they had, again determined by the school budget. The school community was completely set by the administration. So in this case, there was a big emphasis on mindfulness and mental health. And of course, smaller class sizes. As I mentioned, Avro has a very small 3:1 ratio, whereas our current system has a 25:1 ratio. And lastly, there's the idea of teaching style. And in this case, Avro uses what I thought was differentiated instruction, and this is what I focused my research on. We spend a lot of time in the program talking about differentiated instruction, and so I wanted to take some time to really dive deeper into the idea of it. And so my research question became, how does differentiated teaching model affect high school students' success at Avro Academy? And my learning goal was to evaluate the effectiveness of the differentiated teaching methods used on IS students by the instructors of Avro Academy. These are the success criteria I focused on. Please take a moment to pause and read through them if you wish. So for this internship, I chose to use Kath Murdoch's inquiry cycle. Generally speaking, I wanted to make an accurate assessment of whether or not differentiated instruction was really working. And so I wanted the classrooms to function exactly as they would on a daily basis. And so I chose to take the role of a silent observer. I chose this model because it places a heavy emphasis on the observation portion of an inquiry process and involves redefining and reflecting on the observations you made throughout. This is a cyclical process, and not every step needed to be reached, which meant that there was a lot of flexibility in what I was doing, and it allowed for a more individualized inquiry approach. Once I had spent some time at Avro and developed the program, I had already essentially stepped through the first three sections of this inquiry model, so the tuning in, the finding out, and the sorting out were done by the time I had created my question. The next step in the model would be going further, and this meant doing my own research both online and at Avro Academy. So these were some of the key takeaways. The key challenges found within implementing DI was large class sizes, undisciplined learners, lack of resources and parental involvement, inadequate support services, and socioeconomic barriers. I found this study to be really interesting because none of these factors really played a major role at Avro Academy, and because they didn't play a role, it made it much simpler to implement DI effectively at Avro than it would at a typical public setting. Another study that was conducted at a high school science classroom was aimed at investigating the experiences and perceptions of science teachers and students regarding the effectiveness of DI. This was mainly done through a process of interviews on both students and teachers, and it was found that both teachers and students had a highly positive perception of the use of DI. Now, in my own process of going further, I chose to interview both students and teachers at Avro, and I ended up finding really similar results. One of the major themes that emerged across both of our studies was the idea of differentiated instruction, improving student engagement, and motivating students. In particular, students seemed to feel more cared for by their teachers when time was spent making things specific to them. One thing that was interesting to note, though, was that this study found that after comparing results between a class that had used differentiated instruction and a class that didn't, the results of the exams were negligible, and so there was no significant difference in using DI. In my research, I also came across an article that outlined the differences between DI and individualization. These terms are often used interchangeably, but they are different at their core. Individualized instruction is defined to be the matching of instruction to individually identified needs. Here, every student has the same learning goals, but they progress through the content at whatever pace fits them best. This process is also very isolated and does not necessarily incorporate a variety of teaching strategies. Differentiated instruction, on the other hand, is more encompassing. It includes individualization by necessity, but it revolves around the premise of valuing the diversity of students. So at this point, I was able to start making some conclusions. When I first observed teaching at Avro, I had called their style differentiation on steroids, for lack of better words. Every student got teaching that was tailored to them, and it gave it a very tutor-like experience. Classrooms felt like large-scale tutoring halls as opposed to a traditional classroom style. This meant that classrooms could have students from various grades, each of which were learning their own material at their own pace. After finding this article, I began to realize that although Avro Academy used many aspects of DI, it was actually going beyond it, and it became closer to individualized education. Upon some reflection, I began to realize that there is room for improvement here. By creating such differentiated or extremely differentiated teaching, students were left learning in isolation often, and this actually prevented them from developing a lot of the 21st century skills, like social and collaborative skills. This was because, on top of class sizes being small, oftentimes students would be left with peers that were not necessarily the same age or even learning the same material they were. I found this to be a very interesting observation because where it opened some doors in regards to content studies, it ended up closing them in regards to 21st century skills. Finally, we get to my key takeaways. So once this was said and done, I had some very important observations. Firstly, there were many affordances granted in a private school that provided students with many opportunities to succeed. And although we didn't get to look at all of them, I think differentiated instruction became one of the major ones. Differentiated instruction comes with many challenges, but these challenges make it better suited for private school settings. This is because a lot of the challenges that we've discussed do not necessarily exist in a private school as they would in a public school. But that does not mean that it's impossible to implement in a public school setting. It just makes it more difficult to do so. And most importantly, it's important to moderate the way we differentiate our classroom. There needs to be a balance that's held in order to ensure that students are learning to their full potential beyond just the curriculum. Although it was clear by the end of this that DI was highly beneficial, we need to be careful of how we use it in order to ensure that students are getting the full experience of learning and not just the content knowledge. Thank you for listening.